Hi, this is Rabbi Yitzhak David Smith, and we're here in our continuing series on teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach and the role of the Jewish people in being a light into the nations, or la'amim, and teaching the nations of the world the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, God's divine blueprint for all of mankind, which forms the core of the teachings of the Torah and the teachings of what and how a human being is meant to conduct himself and herself, created in God's image. And tonight we're going to talk about the topic of what happened in the Holocaust, what could have been done to avert the Holocaust, and what we can learn from that today. And I want to start with a point that the Lubavitcher Rebbe says in a letter that he wrote to a brigadier general in the United States Army who was a chaplain in the United States Army. And he said in this letter, which is printed at the back of our Sefer Kol B'Yeh Ha'olam, which is the collection of the Rebbe's sichas, talks, and letters on the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And in this letter to the chaplain, Brigadier General Israel Drazen, dated the Erev Shabbos Kodesh Breishis, 5747, which is 1986, the Rebbe says that he's emphasizing many thanks for the good news it contained, particularly about your talks and lectures on the 7 Noahide commandments on a number of occasions, and that these were well received, even enthusiastically. I am certainly gratified that you intend to continue doing so. And then the Rebbe continues, and he says this: there is, of course, no need to emphasize to you the importance of promoting these 7 Noahide commandments among Gentiles. In our day and age, it does not require much imagination to realize that, by way of example, had these divine commandments been observed and adhered to by all the children of Noah, namely the nations of the world, individually and collectively, there would not have been any possibility in the natural order of things for such a thing as a Holocaust. And I mean, we could read this 100 times, because what the Rebbe is saying is such an incredibly important wake-up call to us, to recognize that all the statements when people say never again about the Holocaust, the key here is that what needs to be done is the teaching of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And we're going to talk about that in this presentation and touch a number of angles of this and give everyone the inspiration to realize what needs to be done in our times. But we want to understand what the Rebbe is referring to over here, and we're going to discuss that tonight. And also, I want to mention something else that the Rebbe said, and we're going to discuss tonight also, before I tell you what the Rebbe said in addition, was what would it have helped if everyone had been observing the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, and how could we have made that happen? How would that have prevented the Holocaust? Obviously, if everybody had been observant of the Sheva Mitzvos, then no one would want to do anything wrong. Everyone would have what they need, and no one would want to do anything wrong. But how could even a majority of the people observing Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach have prevented the Holocaust? And that's what we're going to examine tonight. And also, the Rebbe was asked, the second piece I want to tell you, another shocking piece of information, is that the Rebbe was asked by a New York Times reporter in the 1960s whether or not a Holocaust could happen in America. And the Rebbe answered in Yiddish, Morgen in der Früh, which means to say that a Holocaust, in the Rebbe's opinion, could happen tomorrow morning in America. And the question is, how is it possible for the Rebbe to say such a thing? That's absolutely a shocking thing. We don't see, it seems, anything parallel between the United States and Germany. So how could a person possibly say such a thing? And I'd like to start, before we get into looking into that more, I would like to clarify something very, very important over here. That the purpose in what we're talking about tonight is, God forbid, not to demoralize anybody, but rather to remoralize them. Remoralizing people means to do the opposite of demoralizing people. Demoralizing means taking away their morality and therefore reducing the morale, that people become subdued and unable to function and unable to take action in the face of clear danger. On the other hand, remoralizing means bringing back the spiritual backbone of people, awakening the spiritual backbone of people. That's remoralizing people. And automatically, when a person has a spiritual backbone, then their morale increases because they realize that God is with them, and they realize that God is lovingly taking care of them, and that God will make sure that these positive things will unfold in the world. And no matter how dark and how powerful the enemies of God might appear, no matter how powerful they may appear, the people that seek to remove the knowledge of God from the world, nevertheless, a person who's remoralized will not be afraid of that and will be able to take action, because they will be able to continue to spread the concepts of morality. And it's interesting, just on the concepts of morality, that Sun Tzu, who was a great Chinese general who is said to have fought many wars and never lost a battle, wrote that the way to beat the enemy, writing to other people and explaining how to win a war, is to first so degrade the morality and the behavior, the moral behavior of the opponent, that they will no longer have the moral fabric, the moral fortitude to be able to fight. And then they will be so occupied in their moral decay that they won't even be able to fight. And then he says that a war could be fought and won without even firing a shot. So we see that the concept of morality, the concept of being moralized, meaning to say that a person feels they're divine, the fact that they're created in God's image, and they know that, and they're aware of that, and they act according to that, will actually change the course of history. And we see it in the Rebbe's letter. He says individually and collectively, meaning to say the collective is made up of a lot of individuals. And when the people are individually acting morally, then in general, collectively, they're acting morally, and they are of high spirits, and they're able to defeat whatever type of forces come and try to dissuade them from that moral course. And as a result, they're able to be victorious in even the most trying circumstances. So in order to understand the Holocaust, we have to take another look at what really happened. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to forget for a moment everything you ever learned about the Holocaust. And if you disagree with anything I'm saying, and anything I'm saying contradicts something that you believe or have been taught, I'm happy to hear your comments. At the end, take questions. And also, you can put comments below, because I think that I welcome any comments and any suggestions to look at things a different way. But in the meantime, do take the time to just set aside everything you ever heard or learned about the Holocaust, and let's take another look and see how it's possible that knowing Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach and the teaching of Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach would have changed the whole course of history. And I'd like to mention over here that in the process of when the Rebbe says that if the nations and had individually and collectively, the people had been observant of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, there's two parts to that process. Part number one is the non-Jews' observance of the 7 laws of Noah. But equally critical is that the Jewish person is teaching him the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, teaching him the 7 laws of Noah. Those are two necessary components that go hand in hand in order for this to be realized. So when the Rebbe is saying that if there had been the Holocaust would not have happened, the natural order of things, if all the children of Noah, meaning all the human beings in the world, had been observant of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, of the 7 Noahide commandments, it means obviously that the Jews would have been teaching them that. And that is not just, we're going to see, for the effect of the fact that the Jews teaching them is going to bring about the results that the non-Jews then know the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide commandments, and therefore conduct themselves properly. But also, and equally importantly, that the Jewish people take their proper role as teachers to humanity, as teachers to the world, and teaching the humanity the proper course of conduct, bringing to humanity's awareness that every human being is created in the image of God. That itself is a change in the nature of the way of the world. And that itself brings about positive changes in the world. And that is part of the reason why there would not be a Holocaust, because the Jewish people would be taking their proper role, as we're going to see, in teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, and then the non-Jews would be observing the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. Those two things together will create a world of Mashiach. Now, going back to the Holocaust, let's understand that, as I said, please set aside everything that you've ever heard about the Holocaust. And there's a tremendous amount of information on the Holocaust, museums and education programs and videos and movies and so forth. And most of those point to two features of the Holocaust. One is the tremendous cruelty that the Nazis were able to descend to. And the second is the horrendous end results of the Holocaust. And there's pictures of the Nazis shooting people, shooting women and children, God forbid. We should never experience such things. And also the mass internments and the bodies and the empty shoes of the children, Rahman al-Islam. And these are what are the focus of Holocaust education. And as a result, I believe that it fails to emphasize what actually led up to the Holocaust in the decades beforehand, which is the more critical place we have to look in order to be able to understand is what is necessary that humanity should not be able to descend to such a degraded place, and that such ruthless terror can be carried out by one human being against another. That we have to look at that. So there's very little of this real education available, and we're going to spend a few minutes on this. There's a lot that can be dug into in different aspects, but we're going to spend a little bit right now discussing this. So the general perception of the Holocaust is that basically it was a German issue, that the Germans were by nature rabidly anti-Semitic, and there were people who write histories of different attitudes of the Germans going back hundreds of years, and as if they couldn't wait to kill the Jews, and all they needed was a little economic crisis, a little excuse, a little this terrible German nature to kill the Jews would come to the surface, and a little prompting by a maniac to tell them that the Jews were the problem, and this would unleash the latent anti-Semitism of the Germans, and then they and the nations around them in other countries like Poland and so forth would be all too eager to kill as many Jews as possible. And we're going to see that that's not what the Rebbe points to as the reason for the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, the Nazis faced tremendous opposition, both in coming to power and once they were in power. And it was not such a slam dunk situation that the Nazis' plan and their desire to exterminate the Jews as a whole was actually it was something that they were brought to popular power on that basis. In addition to the fact that when the Nazis came into power, the first thing they did was that they established a concentration camp in Dachau to exterminate their opponents, the opponents of the Nazi party. So, however, before we get into that point, I want to just bring out that this is not what the Rebbe points to. The other issue is, the other big misconception of the Holocaust is that the Holocaust was the Holocaust as it's defined was obviously all about the Jews. But the intent to murder and exterminate large swaths of humanity was not all about the Jews. Goebbels was quoted as saying, was quoted as saying that once they finished with the Jews, they were going to kill all the Poles and the Slavs and the Gypsies and so forth, were other communities that were targeted. And we see that really, if you only look at the Holocaust as a German thing, then you fail to see that really in conjunction with the Germans at the same time was the Soviet international socialism working hand in hand with the National Socialists of Germany to eradicate tens and hundreds of millions of human beings at the same time. The Ukrainians were being starved to death in the same time period leading up to the Holocaust and after the Holocaust and so forth. There were just tens and tens of millions of human beings that were being exterminated. So one of the unfortunate misunderstandings is that the Jews were the only target, and the reason that's unfortunate is because it makes people think that what they have to look for in danger signs as to the crumbling of society and the possibility of something bad happening is look for two things. One is that to look for Germans, or Germans that, or people who are using the German terminology or German paraphernalia, let's say like a swastika, and that will be alarming to them, or they have to look at the Jews being targeted. But the problem with that, taking those lessons from the Holocaust, is that then a person will totally be unable to see why that could happen in America, where the Nazi party is not popular at all, and they cannot see what the danger in something that's coming against all of humanity at the same time. However, if we go back and look at the Holocaust and see that it was a part of a much larger extermination plan for humanity, and as a matter of fact, which we're going to discuss later on, that while Hitler was starting his euthanasia campaign in 1939 in the Action T4 program in Germany, at the same time, the euthanasia, 1939, the exact same time, the Euthanasia Society of America was starting, being founded to promote the exact same euthanasia in America. And it was only defeated after the war because of the tremendous revulsion felt by Americans at what had happened in Germany, and with the death camps and so forth, which we'll discuss were outgrowths of the euthanasia campaigns run by the same doctors who ran the euthanasia campaigns. There was a tremendous revulsion. It was defeated, but we're now living in 2020, and already 8 states in the United States of America have adopted this, and the organizations that are pushing the death machinery of euthanasia, calling it voluntary euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide and medical aid in dying, and all kinds of euphemisms for murder. They are working day and night in America, and they are outgrowths of the very same organization in 1939, the Euthanasia Society of America, that had the exact same policies as Hitler. So we're fooling ourselves if we think that the thing to look for is a swastika, or if we have to think that someone has to be directed at the Jews. As a matter of fact, the original campaign of the Lives Unworthy of Life campaign in Germany was to sterilize German citizens who were considered unworthy of being reproduced, meaning to say the mentally ill and the deformed and so forth. That already started happening shortly after the Nazis came to power in 1933, in addition to the concentration camps that they set up to eliminate their opposition. So it was only through a terror campaign against the German population and a consolidation of power over time, over the 6 years from 1933 to 1939, that the Nazi Party was able to create such terror among the German population that they were able to bring about compliance with their plans. Now, that's not to say there weren't people that were enthusiastic for the Nazi Party. We're going to discuss that in a little bit about how Hitler was able to convince them in a very short period of time that he had the solution to the problems that were plaguing Germany. And we have to understand what the problems plaguing Germany were and what Hitler's solution that he offered was, because that we have to watch out not for the swastikas, we have to watch out for the similar thinking and the similar logic and the similar crises, the similar underlying problems that are the real issue. So what does the Rebbe say is the real cause of the Holocaust? The Rebbe does not say it was the Germans. He says it's the fact that the German education system took God out of the school system decades before the Nazis came to power. That is the real underlying problem, the underlying spiritual underpinning of the Holocaust, was the removal of the teaching about God from the schools, and thereby the removal of an absolute right and a wrong. And as the Rebbe explains, once you remove an absolute right and wrong that comes from a power higher than the human intellect, then anything is possible in the human mind. And the Germans, who were known for their very sophisticated thinking, were increasingly corrupted, as anyone who reads the philosophy of the 1800s and German philosophers and their corrupt, anti-God, anti-human thinking is a result from the absence of God in their lives, and the complete depravity of their teachings and their thinking was something that became more and more prevalent in German society, and the people as a whole, even if they themselves were not on the level of a German philosopher with such depravity, or even of a Nazi. At the same time, they no longer had the spiritual backbone in order to be able to fight against the tyranny of Nazism, and its goal was to destroy the German society and to destroy the societies of the country or countries around it, and in the process, as a starting point, after eliminating those unworthy of reproducing, was to doing the euthanasia programs, was to run an extermination plan, God forbid, that they tried to, and they successfully killed millions and millions of Jewish people as part of this plan. But the original underlying spiritual position was the lack of teaching and knowledge about God in the German school system. This is the underlying issue. So the thing to look for is not something that is wearing a swastika. The thing is not to look for someone who's coming in and saying the Jews are the problem. The thing is to look and see who is advocating the removal of God from the school systems. That's where the core issue is. Because then you end up with a generation of people who do not know anything about God and do not have any conception of the absolute right and wrong, and therefore can be swayed in any direction at any moment by whatever strikes them as the problem, or whatever they're told is the problem. So this is the tremendous danger in Germany at the time, was the removal of God from the system. And the Rebbe warned us about this again and again and again, saying, don't allow the removal of God from the school system. This is an existential danger to the United States of America. The Rebbe said that the Talmidim and the Talmidim of Hitler, Yamach Shemai, the students and the students of the students of Hitler and the Nazis were working in America and are working in America to bring about the same result that happened in Europe, God forbid, by removing God from the school systems in the United States of America. So the Rebbe instituted as an emergency campaign the moment of silence to overcome the absurd arguments that there should be no God taught to the children, and at least there should be a moment of silence so the children should have a moment to be able to free themselves from the atheist, non-stop atheist teachings that from every angle and every subject promote the idea that life is random and life is accidental and there's no God and there's no meaning, Rahman al-Itzlan, and there's no right and there's no wrong other than what the teachers persuade the kids at that moment in time is right and wrong. The Rebbe was arguing with us to please go and bring a moment of silence to at least break for one moment in the children's day, that there should be a glimmer of hope that in their own quiet they would come to perceive a divine power in their lives. And they would go ask their parents and their grandparents to give them what they should be thinking about, and thereby prompt their parents, their grandparents to learn about God. So this is the Rebbe's antidote to recognize that the real danger is not by the name of the party, and it's not by the flag of the party, and it's not by the target of the party. It's by the underlying goal to remove the knowledge of God from the earth. And that always starts with the children. It always starts with the education system. So that is number one to really understand about what happened in the Holocaust. Now, this godless drive against humanity, targeting all humanity, is something that was happening, as I said, not only in Germany, but was happening in Russia, happening in other countries, and has happened. Some estimates say that the total death toll of the socialists, whether the National Socialists, the International Socialists, whether they call themselves the Marxists, Nazis, Social Democrats, all these related organizations that are part of a tremendous death movement that brings about mass destruction and mass starvation, Rahman al-Itzlan, is upwards of 500 million human beings have been exterminated over the last 100 years, far more than any disease has ever possibly caused. 500 million human beings, including the forced abortions and the starvations and the extermination camps. So the Rebbe really, really wants us to be able to completely overturn this by teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. So when we see what the Rebbe was warning against, we could see that how things can happen in America all of a sudden. The Rebbe said Holocaust can happen tomorrow morning. God forbid. But what would that look like? Well, we see already the same T4 program that the Nazis instituted is being brought about in America, with physicians being used to eliminate their patients with physician-assisted suicide. And they want to come with all kinds of fancy terms like it's compassion and it's choices and all kinds of epiphanies. I don't mean epiphanies. The words escaping my mind right now, but these are just euphemisms. That's it. Euphemisms to describe murder and suicide in other ways. They are trying to fool the people into believing that this is something actually is worthwhile and meaningful, but it can only be sold to people that don't have a solid foundation and a belief in what's right and wrong, and that it's wrong for a human being to end another human being's life, no matter what the cause is. That's something that a person can only appreciate if they have a deeper understanding of God and that life is God-given. So that's already happening in America. We now have 8 states that have adopted this, and the proponents of physician-assisted suicide are working tirelessly day and night to make sure that people are taking this poison. I've read police reports referring to the organizations that are advocating this and how they work to bring the poison. In some states, they actually bring the poison to people's doors and wait around for them to take it until they can die. It's just it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to realize that this is happening in this country and don't think that it's any different than what happened in Germany, because some of the German doctors were later quoted as saying that when they started the T4 program to eliminate these helpless elderly people and these sick children and deformed people, disabled people, they were thought it was a good idea. They also had good intentions at the beginning. Everyone has good intentions at the beginning. That's the only way you can get a human being to corrupt themselves, with is a small little step in the direction of dehumanizing them. When they're dehumanized, that's when they can then take on the next step and the next step. And we see that already in Europe. It's now physician-assisted suicide is going on by the thousands and the thousands. And doctors, already 10 years ago, 1 in 4 doctors in Holland admitted that they had killed their patients without their consent. This is what's going on, and now they're killing people who have emotional pain. And in Canada, they are advocating that it should be extended to children, Rahman Aslan, and they shouldn't need to get questioning whether they should need to get their parents' consent, because it's compassion. They claim it's compassion, but it's really just the human mind run amok. And the only solution is to teach the people the Sheva Mitzvos b'nei Noach. So we also have to remember that these same doctors, that, by the way, there was such opposition and such outrage against this T4 program in Germany that the churches and others really rose up against Hitler on this issue, and he had to stop it about 2 years into the program. But those doctors that had run the euthanasia of the elderly and of the children were not done. They graduated from that limited program, and they became the doctors that ran the death camps. The death camps, my dear friends, was run by doctors, by medical doctors, trained medical doctors who had originally taken oaths not to harm human beings. They became so dehumanized that they were able to kill people in the thousands and the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands and collectively in the millions by doctors, by medical doctors. And the Nazis succeeded in medicalizing the whole process of euthanasia, that it became a medically controlled and run program, and that people felt more comfortable around the doctors running it. And then it turned out that those doctors were running the camps, and the doctors were the ones to greet and inspect the people who came to the camps, which would die immediately and which would be worked to death later on. This is what is happening now in America with doctors. There was 26 doctors in May of 2019 that signed a letter in one of the New Jersey newspapers saying that they were ready and willing and enthusiastic to give poison to murder their patients. This is a result of a lack of education, because they don't know that there's a God, and they don't know what that means, that there's a God, and they don't know that they're created in the divine image and that their patient is created in the divine image, and they don't have permission to kill that person. They've crossed the line that they will only, and God willing, they should do tshuva, and they should return to God from this terrible decision they've made. But they are only going further and further, and they have the capability of becoming more and more dehumanized, that they will then euthanize more people whose lives are not worthy of living. It was only the first was the elderly, and then the terminally ill and the disabled. But then the Jewish lives became lives unworthy of lives. Once you make that distinction, then anyone could be fit into that category based on whatever the government decides is now a life unworthy of life. So this is what the Rebbe was warning about. The Rebbe was pleading with us to see this and to recognize that this is the real underlying cause of the Holocaust, is the lack of teaching of God, about God. So we also see today developing in the streets tremendous lawless chaos and violence. Even places where the police are not allowed in, tremendous and dangerous violence in the United States of America, and obviously in other parts of the world. But the Rebbe warned about this also. He said, if we don't teach the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, then as soon as the police are not present, then the people, well, they're only kept in line by the police being there. When the police are not there, then everything, all chaos will break out. There'll just be lawlessness and disorder. And the opposite of what God has commanded us to create in this world, which is the Sheva Tzar, all of humanity is commanded to create a civilized world. So more police is not the option. The option is remoralizing the people with the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach is knowing that there's an eye that sees us, there's an ear that hears us. There's a creator, a God who is the ruler of this great creation that he has created, and then living our lives accordingly at every moment of time. We don't need the police around us to be able to do the right thing. When we know what's right and we know who we're accountable to, that's what we need to implant and transmit to all the residents of this planet. So I want to now talk a little bit more about what happened in the time leading up to the Holocaust, because it was not a momentary change. As we've discussed, there was the removal of God from the system, and that led to the disintegration of the moral fabric of society in Germany. And then what happened? How were people able to be convinced? Now, I would like to start by quoting from a book over here, which I think, unfortunately, is now being no longer sold on Amazon, because this is Mein Kampf from Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemay. And the reason that I picked it up, I bought it a number of years ago, and I actually started reading it recently. And I was astonished to discover that while we've all come to believe that the man was a lunatic, he actually lays forth a very sensible and cleverly disguised program. Now, when I say cleverly disguised, because one of the things he doesn't just talk about, he talks about how he's waving the flag of creating a new German Third Reich. But one of the things he does not talk about is that the people that really influenced him. There were people there was something called the Dr. van Liebenfeld was a defrocked monk who founded the Temple of the New Order. And this is something that Hitler had been recruited into, and he was now a disciple of his. And there was another, Dr. Leopold Potsch, who was taught German political history, was apparently an influence on him. And what this book does represent, though, is what he's writing for the more average German person. So he's disguising this dark, evil plan in the wrapping of something very dramatic and what looks to be on one level appealing to the average German, by presenting a plan for taking Germany out of the tremendous chaos that it was in the 1920s, that had been destroyed basically in World War I, was facing tremendous economic upheaval, a lot of violence by the Marxists who called themselves the Social Democrats. And there was a tremendous amount of upheaval, chaos, and so forth. And he proposed a new form of leadership to bring about the Third Reich. Now, so he was masking his vision, which was really an evil vision of destruction, but it was using, it was always rhetoric both by the communists and the Nazis to promote a something that's inspiring, although really what's underlying it is the desire to destroy. and bring humanity into tremendous darkness. But so when reading it, what I looked at it from what would be the perspective of the average German reader, how were they being persuaded and talked to really understand how a population of people can be turned around in a very short period of time to be willing to become the architects of this tremendous destruction of humanity, and seeing also from the angle, seeing how easily a person could be persuaded. So the interesting thing is that he points out the tremendous danger to German society posed by the Marxists. They were trying to crumble Germany under a communist revolution, and they call themselves the Social Democrats. The only problem was that, first of all, the Social Democrats, the Marxists, were a tremendous danger to German society. They wanted to bring about a communist revolution. But the second problem was that some of the most vocal Social Democrats, some of the most vocal Marxists were actually Jews. And this is what he does in his logical argument. He says that since the Marxists are a great danger to the Social Democrats, are a great danger to German society, and since that's undisputed, that they're a danger, and they are violent, and they're trying to bring down the downfall of what remains of German society, and they are one and the same as the Jews because they were the most vocal, and they ran a lot of the Social Democrats were newspapers, and Marxist newspapers were run by Jews. So he said, therefore, the Jews are this evil force, God forbid. And the thing is, he talks about how he met with Marxists and Social Democrats, and he tried to talk to them, and he saw that they were intractable in their beliefs, and that's what happens when you talk to a Marxist. It's an ideological belief. It's like a firmly held belief that has no grounding whatsoever. And he said, this is the Jew. The Jew is unredeemable. So if the Jew is unredeemable, then he came to the conclusion that this was the enemy of German society, enemy of the German future, and therefore it needed to be something that needed to be eliminated, God forbid. So this is his logical reasoning, which is something that's meant to appeal to the average person. Now, his other second point that I like to drive home or to bring to your attention is that he says, well, what about the old line German guard, meaning the people who had been in the army in World War I, who were patriotic Germans who had fought for the king, for the Kaiser, and that they were obviously not Marxists, they were not socialists, they did not want any of these things. What about them? Aren't they a reasonable force to be joined with, to be able to fight for the preservation of Germany? And his point over here is that they were just too soft. They were just preferred rousing patriotic statements to actually taking action. And even though many of these people had been officers, like I said, in the German army, so they were experienced people. They had been courageous and fought in World War I. They were not, just people who were afraid of battle. But at the same time, they were now unwilling to use violence against the German Marxists. And because of that, on the other hand, the German Marxists were using violence, and these old line Germans were not willing to use violence. And one of the things that he makes a point in the book is that if you have people who are unwilling to use violence to defeat a threat, facing up against a force that is willing to use violence, then the people who are not willing to use violence will always lose, because their unwillingness to use violence is something that represents a softness in their ability to really follow through on what they believe. So his solution is, as he was, and this is, when I say is, I mean someone who's going to follow this model would come up with a solution that he created a militant youth force that was made up of people that were too young to have served in World War I. So they weren't that soft, older, middle-aged, 30-year-old, 40-year-old type, 50-year-old, 60-year-old general or officer that was now, too settled in life to want to actually fight. And these young people were trained because they'd been brought up in a system. He doesn't bring this part out, but this is what the Rebbe is saying earlier. They've been brought up in a system that no longer had God in the school system. They were committed to using violence against the Marxists, and that's what they did. And they were inspired by a vision of building the Third Reich. So this is what must be appealable and must be reasonable to the average German reader who's, somewhat intelligent German reader. I'm not saying that necessarily the most intelligent person would be swayed by this, but the average intelligent person would be able to be persuaded by this. And the reality is that the most vocal Jews were calling for the destruction of Germany. And the assimilated Jews, there were a lot of Jews that were assimilated into German society that were not Marxist. In fact, they had been loyal Germans for decades and hundreds of years, and had important positions in German government and so forth. But they just hoped to survive, and they were not out there the most vocal people defending against the Marxists. And then the religious Jews thought Germans' politics had nothing to do with them, and they were silent. So this really goes back now to the Rebbe said, if the non-Jews had been observant of the Sheva Mitzvos b'nei Noach, of the 7 Noahide laws, there would not have been a Holocaust. Why? Because the Jews' job is to carry this message of God's plan for humanity to every single human being. The Jewish people would have been this incredibly powerful voice of light and godliness coming into the world and influencing the rest of the German people to see the world the way God sees it. That would not only have eliminated the potential for people to go and do something so terrible as killing another human being, but it would have given them the strength to stand up against the fear being instilled by the terrorism of the Marxists and the terrorism of the Nazis, and the battles that were going on, largely orchestrated in order to create terror among the people. And it would have, the Jews, in standing up with this powerful voice in the face of such darkness, would have been an inspiration to all of Germany. And the Germans would have said to anyone who came along and tried to say the Jews are the problem, well, what do you mean the Jews are the problem? The Jews are the solution. The Jews are offering us a real solution, the Torah solution. It's not the destruction of Marxism, the destructive forces of Marxism. It is a real stable society based on Torah and what God's will is for humanity. That would have been the message that would have been resounding throughout German society by virtue of the Jews teaching Sheva Mitzvos b'nei Noach and taking that role and standing up and talking to every single German that this is the way the German society and the German country should be going, not into more chaos, not into more debt, not into more violence, but rather into a place of what the Torah says. And instilling God in the schools. Well, the solution wasn't to go back to pre-World War I Germany, because they'd already removed God from the schools. So that wasn't the solution either. The solution was to bring God back into the lives of the German people. And the real true God of the Torah, of Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, that is the solution. That is what would have transformed all of German population and the population of the countries around Germany, and carrying this message of what the proper life for a human being is and the proper for a country really is, would have saved Germany from this terrible destruction of the battle between the Marxists and the Nazis, which led to the destruction of the entire Europe. This battle of two mutually cooperative opposing forces was the battering ram which destroyed the entire Europe, and most of Eastern Europe fell under the communists after the war, after being destroyed by the Nazis, was then destroyed by the communists. So this is the answer to what we're meant to be doing today. So we see today, just by way of example, in America, unfortunately, many of the loudest mouthed Marxists around are unfortunately misguided Jews. We see also that the flag waving of the patriotic Americans of both parties, there's patriotic Americans of all party descriptions. They're making a lot of patriotic statements and wanting things the way they were before. But this is very much, one could say, like the sentimental old guard in the 1920s in Germany, because what they're looking for back is not the real changes that need to be made. The real changes that need to be made is that we need to restore the knowledge of God to every single human being in the United States of America. It's not acceptable that immigrant children are allowed to come to the United States of America, and many of them from places that they did learn about God in their school systems, and then they come to America and they're sent into radically anti-God schooling systems. That is a terrible, terrible tragedy. These people are coming to the United States of America for better futures for their families, and instead they're being deprived, and is being ripped out of them the knowledge of God. So we see that in America today, there's many people that are lamenting what's going on, the violence, they're lamenting the disintegration of many aspects of America. But it's a lot of talk. And the real action has to be taken up by the Jewish people so that we don't have to create a vacuum for a new desperate force like the Nazis that rose into power because they were able to, they saw a danger to Germany. If someone could come and say there's a danger to America right now, there is danger to America. Having the economy closed and the economy destabilized and people forced in all these different behaviors that are being forced on people right now is something that is a grave danger to America. But then if they mislabel the source of the danger as whether some people say it's the Jews are the problem, the Muslims are the problem, the people who don't wear masks are the problem, whatever, or the people that are going to say the people who don't vaccinate are the problem, whatever classification of a different group that they come up with to say that this is the problem, why America is suffering and in chaos, it may not necessarily be the Jews. Because, there's all this, many people who will stand up and say, but it's anti-Semitism and that's not allowed. But then they'll target someone else. They'll target whoever it is that they could target with the least pushback. That's what the idea is, to target that group and then turn America in on itself, Rahman al-Islam, to try to go and destroy whatever that group is in the name of restoring America to its original or going on to some even greater future that they might envision for America. But in the end of the day, as we see with the Nazis, that whatever they were pointing to as the problem was just the start. And actually, even before they started with the Jews, they were starting with their opponents, and they were starting with the disabled and the weak of society in Germany. So no one should fool themselves to think that if they're not a Jew, that they're going to be saved because the Jews are a target. And if they're a Jew and someone else is the target, they'll be saved because they're not that other person. Our job as Jewish people is to stand up for all of humanity and to defend all of humanity against the assault by those people who want to take God, the knowledge of God, away from them and to erase the divine image from the face of humanity. That is what our job is to stand up against, no matter who or what the particular cause is or what the particular excuse is. The fact of the matter is, this is really where the tremendous opportunity for the Jewish people is to stand up and provide this clear moral leadership. Then not only does no one have the opportunity to say the Jews are the problem because the Jews are speaking up on the behalf of the destructive forces, they could see clearly that the Jews are speaking up on behalf of the positive forces, the forces that want to bring humanity to its real potential. They are going to see that. It's going to transform the vast majority of the people in the country to be God-fearing people by observing the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And the minority, a very small minority that's the instigators of all these godless movements and these godless forces, are truly going to see that they are completely outnumbered, and they will have no effect and not be able to pull the strings on the people, and instead they will just disintegrate. They will disintegrate, and a portion of them will do tshuva, and a portion of them will disappear because they will no longer see that. They'll see that they've completely failed, that their grip on humanity has disintegrated. So this is really what we could do as the Jewish people. This is not what we could do. This is what we have to do. This is what we're able to do. This is our great gift that God Almighty has given us. And this is the great gift that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, has pointed out, the Lubavitch Rebbe has pointed out to us, this tremendous responsibility and this tremendous opportunity that we have right now in these times. So the Jewish people must be taking the real solution to the forefront here. The real solution is teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. We have to be the leading voice of what's right in God's world and what's God's will for this country and what's God's will for every country. We can't be silent. We can't be silent saying, listen, this is something other Americans have to figure out. That silence would be abandoning our responsibility to this great country, to this great world, and to our fellow human beings and to our fellow Americans. We need to be speaking relentlessly about what's right and clarifying what's wrong. And because it's in the benefit, it's really a matter of Hatzalah Nefashos, of saving human lives on a moment-by-moment basis. And this is the way it needs to be done. So just merely sending around WhatsApp videos to your friends that are complaining about what's going on does not count as standing up for God. Standing up for God means speaking to you, the non-Jewish people, and showing them what is right, and speaking to them about what is right. Speaking of it as a God Almighty, going through each one of the Sheva Mitzvos ben Enoch, and all the details of them, and all the things that expand from them, and speaking about Kibbud Aveim, and prayer, and the necessity of charity, and tzedakah, and what does it mean to do tshuva. We're coming to Rosh Hashanah, we're coming, every day is an opportunity for tshuva. So this is what we need to be, the leading voice in this country for what is best for this country. We have to put aside our personal calculations as to whether or not a particular person can get a PPP loan or can get an extra stimulus check and so forth. That is a distraction. That's a total distraction, and you have to evaluate not what's best for me, but what's best for the entire country. The Rebbe says that that's why Yisro was merited to have his, Jethro merited to have his son-in-law be Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu was because he advised Paro that Paro's of Egypt, that his suggested course of action was in the best, not in the best interest of Egypt. And the best interest of Egypt was to allow the Jews to live and not to kill the Jewish son, the Jewish boys, and throw them in the river. That's why Yisro merited, even though he lost his position, he was thrown out from his position, but he merited to be the one who was the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we always have to put the interests of the country first to make the decision what is best for this country, and then we have to advocate that on behalf of everybody, because that is really what the job of the Jewish person is, to be an Or La'amim. What is the right thing for the country to do now? What is the right thing for the people to do now? What is God's will at this moment in time, both individually and collectively? This is our job. So we what's best for the country is obviously a functioning economy. Currency is a word from the Latin word for flow. Economy is the word for based on some old French and Latin words for manager, a household manager making nimble decisions in a vicinity. These things need to be going on and increasing. This is what we have to see as needs to be restored urgently, every moment that's going by with a disruption in the flow of the economy. The flow of currency and the flow of the economy is a disruption in the way that the country is meant to function and the world is meant to function. And there's no valid excuses for that whatsoever. Any excuses are just actually feeding into the plans of those that wish to either intentionally destabilize the country or will seize the opportunities in the instability of the country. And it's foolishness. It's foolishness to think that somehow it's possible to shut down a country and then just somehow it's going to be able to function. Rahman al-Itzlan. It's like taking a human being and shutting down their bodily organs and saying, oh, we'll just wake them up later. It's so senseless. It's done in a stupor, and a stupor only by people who have no sense of history, no sense of what the Weimar Republic was like and what the type of inflation and instability was like there, and how that created such an irreversible instability that it was impossible to recover from it, and it led to, in the absence of moral leadership and moral guidance of the Jewish people teaching the Sheva Mitzvos ben Enoch, it led to Rahman al-Islam, the death of tens and hundreds of millions of human beings. Far more than any disease could possibly cause in people's worst nightmares. So we have to restore this country to sanity by teaching the Sheva Mitzvos ben Enoch, teaching what's right. And instead of saying to a governor or a mayor and saying, oh, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Governor, whatever you say. No, the answer is, the Rebbe is telling us, has to be Yehuda v'yigash Yehuda. Yehuda approached Yosef HaTzadik, his brother, who he didn't realize was that he was really, he thought he was the second to the king of Egypt. And he approached him with such a force and such a certainty of what was right, that to defend his brother Benjamin, that he told the king how things should be conducted in the kingdom of Egypt, even though Egypt was the greatest kingdom of the time and this person was the greatest ruler of the time. He approached him with a tremendous certainty and determination to tell him what was right. And the Rebbe says that the nations of the world are longing for the Jews to do that right now. You think when you go to a governor or to a mayor or to a president and the prime minister and a king or a queen and you tell them, oh, yes, we are happy to do whatever you want whenever you want it, that you're providing moral leadership and scoring points with them, it's the furthest thing from the truth. Scoring points is only when you speak the truth. Because when you try to score points on a crooked system with a crooked scoring system that is only looking for people to cooperate and people to surrender, then there's not enough you could do to score enough points. And anyways, you're never going to score enough points to weigh the suspicion that anyways, since a Jewish person is someone that has rooted in him the divine spark of the neshama Eloki, why did the Nazis target the Jews first? Because they knew even the secular Jews always had the potential that at any moment they could do tshuva and they could become this fiery firebrand to bring to the light of God to all of humanity. So that's why the Jews were targeted first, because they're the teachers to the world. They're the light into the nations. So you can't escape that. You can't escape the hostility of the forces of darkness against the Jewish people. The only thing to do is to bring more light. Bring more light until they themselves are dissolved in the light. And the way to dissolve them in the light is to speak the truth relentlessly, relentlessly, relentlessly. Excuse me, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. President, your course of action is not in the best interest of this country. Mr. Governor, your actions you're taking are not in the best interests of this state. Mr. Premier, the actions that you're saying are suggesting are not in the best interests of this province. Mr. Mayor, that you are doing something that is against the interests of this state, this city. That's the way a Jew is meant to speak to the world. Because since we know, because God has given us the Torah, we can look inside and see what's right and wrong. We have to lovingly speak with strength and with pleasantness, but with strength first. With a certainty, we have to speak to the entire world about what's right and make it clear without any reservations. This is the antidote. This is the aversion of anything negative, and it's the building of everything positive. Like I said at the beginning, our goal here is not to demoralize people. There's nothing to be demoralized about. And the matter of fact, if you don't want to participate and you want to sit around, setting around WhatsApp videos and thinking that and walking around stamping your feet, you don't like what this politician said or that, you don't like that politician said, and how this person is not doing it right and how that person is not doing it right, and sit around schmoozing some more. Other people are going to do it because the Yidden are going to do this. And the question is, for each one of us, are we going to be the ones to participate in this tremendous, tremendous meritorious act of teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, of teaching the nations of the world what it means to be an upright human being who's here to civilize the world and to bring tzedek v'yosher to the world? That is the only question. If we were born into this responsibility. This is the responsibility of the Dor Shvi, the seventh generation, that the Rebbe said to bring Mashiach, that we're bringing Mashiach down here in a way of, like Avraham Avinu is our example. Avraham Avinu went and taught the entire world, and we're the ones to bring that to completion. So this is our responsibility. So I want to just share with you another book that, again, there's a book called My Opposition, The Diary of Friedrich Kellner, A German Against the Third Reich. Fascinating book. I don't know if I should recommend that you read it because it is so both terrifying in the way he shows the degree to which, this is a non-Jewish man in Germany, that he opposed the Nazis, and he continued to oppose the Nazis throughout the entire Nazi period. And the reason I say I'm not sure if to recommend reading it or not is because his description of the way in which people were divided into groups, and the party against the non-party members, and the Germans were divided against each other. And anyone who opposed the Nazi party and refused to show enough commitment to the cause was ostracized and then picked up and interrogated and then often executed. This is, we can read this book, we can see what's going on today with the total mindless absorption that regardless, it's irrelevant the truth, irrelevant the statistics, it's irrelevant anything, and causing people to be driven into greater and greater fear and panic. He talks about the fear and panic that the Nazis used to drive everybody to do insane things against the other German people. And he lived in a place that wasn't even he's talking about the acts against the German population by the German non-Jews by the Nazis. And it's enough to make a person's sleep difficult to read it. Any intelligent person that's going to read it is going to see what this Mr. Kellner went to the trouble of writing this book for, so that we should see what's going on today, where anyone who's increasingly thinks out of line and speaks out of line on multiple subjects is immediately accused of being a danger to everybody else, whether a danger because of their ideas, or because they're a harasser, or because they're a racist, or because they're saying the things that are medically unacceptable or against public health. So many ways in which people are being excluded and just told that they're against the common interest. It's remarkable, and it's really important to understand the process by which the German population the mindset that was manipulated into thinking this ways. You see, the Germans were ripe for the Holocaust because of their two features that they had, which made them capable of carrying it out. Not because necessarily inborn anti-Semitism, we said before, it was really the removal of God from the school system, but because they were so obedient and willing to follow orders. And then they were so systematic and so organized. So those two things together made them those that were able to be recruited into the death machineries were able to do that with great facility and great expedience. But the ability to manipulate a population into thinking what's dangerous and to being afraid of what they're being told is dangerous is remarkable to read in that book. So this, I want to conclude with Rav Yonish and Steifen. I've said this a number of times. It says in his Sefer HaMitzvos Hashem, which has a section of Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, but he brings the point that he says, why does it say in the Gemara, the Sanhedrin Tzadik Zayin Amen Aleph Ve'ein ben David ba ad shedishapech kol hamalchios leminus? Why does it say in the Gemara that the Mashiach is not going to come until all the nations turn over to atheism and denying God? And he says that this is because that the intention is that, what the Gemara is saying is that it's going to be such a general decay of the morality that comes from not knowing God and from denying God, that and many from the people will, and even maybe a majority, will go after this approach without any religious beliefs and no faith in God. Then the whole world will start to disintegrate. There'll be no law and order. So that's right. There'll be no law and order. And the whole world is just going to be collapsing under the tremendous immorality. And then from this itself, the wise people, that they're going to see, the wise among the nations and the people with the bright people are going to see this from this darkness. They will see that the great kindness and great goodness that God Almighty did by giving our Torah to us, and how fine the words are of the Torah are, and the order and the law and the order and the arranging all the actions of mankind. And they'll understand and they're going to grasp how Torah is really the greatest guide for all of human thinking. And it makes chukim mishpatim yeshorim, straight and proper laws and decrees, whether between man and his fellow, and whether between the commandments between man and the heaven, and it create lahami to seder v'mishta v'chayka kadesha ba'aretz, and to set up a organized rule and laws and holy decrees in the land, in order to include humanity in this perfection of the world that God has so desired. And this is going to or cause an arousal in the spirit, the pure spirit of mankind, to say, ki namu. They're going to say that we want to go and learn the Torah, we want to follow in the ways of the Torah. This is what's going to come about. And all of the evil will be completely consumed like smoke in a fire. And then Melech Mashiach, the righteous Redeemer of the entire world, is going to come. So, and then he says that this is, because it says in the Gemara, Amar Rava, Mikra, Kula Hafach Lavan Toheru, because and he explains at the end that that this is a remez. To the remez nagas sas is that once it becomes entirely white, Kule it's not something that we want to see happening, obviously. Then the entire knowledge of the viewpoints of mankind will be completely turned over to good. And then we'll have this concept that it says that it'll all be turned over, and it will be tahar. So this is why Rava is saying this in the Gemara, connected to this expression in the Gemara that Mashiach is going to come only when the kingships become deniers of God, because it will bring about that there will be complete transformation of humanity. So this is what our job is. This is what we have been gifted with. We have the ability to look and learn the lessons from history, and to know that, to feel the inspiration and the calling to be able to accomplish these incredible things in our times. Teaching Sheva Mitzvos is not just providing the humanity with information, it's providing an entirely different worldview for all of humanity. Instead of feeling any sort of doubt or apologizing or offering to subjugate the Jewish people and their Torah and Menhagim and our Torah and Menhagim to anything that the nations are saying in their panic, our job is to stand strong and provide a clear leadership of that tefillah b'tzibur and davening together and creating a mikdash ma'at that's basically based tefillah l'chol ha'omim is something that's not negotiable, that we must carry on with this and explain to the nations why this carrying out God's will is not only the proper thing to do, but it will bring a refuah, it will bring a spiritual refuah, which will bring a physical healing. They will bring a spiritual healing, which will bring a physical healing to the entire world. And therefore, the key is to overcome the way to win the milchama of the milchamas Hashem is through teaching the Sheva Mitzvos Ben Enoch, to bring all of mankind to Yakir V'yedu Kol Ba'elam, that the entire world is going to know that there's nothing besides Hashem. This is our job. This is our goal. And by speaking up and saying what's right, this will bring a level of clarity, not only to ourselves, but to all the people around us, and they will appreciate it. They will appreciate why we're doing what we're doing when we explain it to the entire public, why we're doing what we're doing, why we are gathering for Torah learning, why we gather in yeshivas and have chadarim with in-person learning, and all of humanity needs to come and hear the Torah, and to have shuls that function out of basic tefillah l'chol ha'omim. This is not negotiable. This is the guidance for all of humanity. This is God's will, and that brings, by reconnecting all of humanity to Avinu Sheva Shamayim, that realizing that every human being has a father in heaven, and that through the Jewish people, by being B'nai B'chai, B'nai Yisrael, the firstborn chosen son of Hashem, that the Jewish people are, that we share with the other achim, the other nations of the world. Teach them the Sheva Mitzvos Ben Enoch, and teach them the knowledge of the Eibishter. That will bring about the coming of Mashiach. We don't have to experience anything negative. And a person might say to themselves, well, if only we had listened to the Rebbe when the Rebbe said this in 1986, the letter I was reading before, or the statements the Rebbe said about the moment of silence in the 1980s, and what the Rebbe said in the 1970s. We're talking about 30, 40 years since the Rebbe said it. So a person will say, oh my gosh, now they wake up and they see that the forces that want to chas v'sholom take the knowledge of Hashem out of the world have been working nonstop since then. And who are we to pass judgment? But have we? To what extent are we working nonstop? So the answer is, what happened in the past is the past. What is now is very simply that we have the ability in a infinitesimally small time to not only make up what could have been done in the past, but to accomplish it now so much faster and with so much more vigor and so much more readiness in the part of the world that the entire world is ready to be able to learn what we have to teach. All we have to do is open our mouths and begin to speak. And we are doing that in Baruch Hashem. More and more we are doing that. And other people are doing that. There's thousands of non-Jews learning every week from Yidden and learning directly from Sforim and directly from teachers. And it has to be done from teachers, and it has to be done not just from the Sforim, but it has to be done from a real live human teacher, a Jewish teacher that's going to teach the humanity what it is exactly Hashem's will, what it means to be created in the image of God. And that is the job of the Jewish people. And we'll be zeicha that in every action and every minute that we spend right now, we will multiply and exponentially and beyond exponentially multiply the effect of our actions and bringing light into the world and bringing simcha into the world. That it should be bechesed v'rachamim, the Eibishter's redemption of the Jewish people and taking the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael, the building of the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, which will be an eternal building of the temple and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem for the benefit of all of humanity. And the redemption of all of humanity at the same time is going to be the greatest gift and the greatest experience and the greatest joy, an eternal joy that all of humanity is meant to experience. And amidst Hashem, we should have it now.